Every year, I try to get out and ride as many coasters as possible. And in 2022, I made trips up north, down south, to the east, and to the west. I hit some new parks, but also got to revisit parks I hadn't been to in years. I got to re-ride a lot of coasters, and some shot up in my ranks and others shot down. Later this week, we will look at the ones that were disappointing. But today, let's be positive. These are the 20 coasters that shot up in my rankings in 2022. I have two honorable mentions. Coasters that were mildly amusing, but not worthy for this list. First, Wavebreaker at SeaWorld San Antonio. I've ridden this twice before, and both times it was just so boring. This time around, I had a little bit more fun with it. I don't know why, it's not like anything changed, but I found enjoyment on it this time. The other is New Mexico Rattler at Cliffs Amusement Park. I rode this 5 years ago and it was pretty good, but this time it beat me stupid. Through all that roughness, I was thinking, hey, this ride's pretty forceful. If they smoothed it out, it would have easily made my list, but as much as I enjoyed the elements, I was equally horrified by the roughness. Number 20, Cobra's Curse at Busch Gardens Tampa. I first rode this 4 years ago, and I thought it was a good, solid, modern family coaster. This time, I think I appreciated it more. The fact that it goes forward, backward, and then spins. And this year, on my first ride, I went by myself, and I was spinning so much by the end that it surprised me, and the people sitting in the other car. I think they were worried about me, but I was loving it. Number 19, Scorpion at Busch Gardens Tampa. Another small Busch Gardens coaster cracks my list, but this is the last one from that park that's on here. It's a Schwarzkopf Silver Arrow from 1980, but the one thing that stood out to me was how smooth it was. Last time I was at the park was in 2018. I rode this once and I wasn't all that impressed. I actually thought this was the weakest Schwarzkopf that I've ridden. I don't know if that's still the case. If it is, it's no fault of Scorpion. It's intense and smooth as glass. Pretty amazing for a portable coaster over 40 years old. Number 18, Wild Thing at Valley Fair. After my first ride in 2021, I wasn't surprised, but I also wasn't happy with it. So much heightened speed, and it didn't seem to do anything with it. This time, I thought it was running with some force. Between the positives and the negatives, it was no longer a coaster that you can take a nap on. I also thought it was much rougher than it was in 2021. Maybe that made it seem more forceful when it really wasn't. That's actually a strong possibility. Number 17, Poltergeist at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. Aside from the new color scheme and the new theme, the ride itself is pretty average and hasn't changed. It's still pretty awkward and janky. I had to put my hand behind Sophie's head so she wouldn't slam it against the headrest. But that aside, it's a middle of the road ride. I normally don't think a ride's theming adds much to the ride, but if you compare how this is now to how it was, you can't help but to be impressed. The station was so bland before. Now, it's a continuation of the haunted house from the queue. Launching out of a haunted house really improves the ride experience. Number 16, Cyclone at Wonderland Amusement Park. The first time I rode this, it was only once and it was 4 years ago. I think I was just taken back by the bathtub cars that had no restraint. This time I knew what to expect and I can focus more on the ride itself, and it's outrageous. There's just something about making sharp turns and diving down sharp drops while you're just sitting in a tub. Nothing holding you in, it's different. My favorite part was diving down, rising up, and making a sharp turn. That was insane and felt really janky, and I really enjoyed this for all its fun and jank. Number 15, Prowler at Worlds of Fun. This was my third time around at Worlds of Fun. The first time I was there, I rode Prowler a couple times in the morning and I was not impressed. Then I got some afternoon rides and I thought it was the best ride in the park. 3 years later, I rode it again and I just wasn't feeling it. So when I came back in 2022, I wasn't expecting much. But this time, I got a front row ride and that was something. I was stunned with how well it was running. I went back around to the back row and yikes, it beat me to death. I rarely suggest the front row, but Prowler seems to be better up there all around. Number 14 is Reptilian at King's Dominion. This is one of the most unique coasters in America. You aren't going to find another bobsled that uses a full train anywhere else in the country. It can be forgotten at King's Dominion. It used to be tucked away next to Volcano, back when it was known as Avalanche. But now that its neighbor is Tumbili, and it's in the Jungle Expedition area, it traded its snow theme for a reptile theme. Regardless, I rode this for the first time in 4 years, and I was really stunned with how intense it was. From my experience, bobsleds always feel out of control, and at 41 miles per hour, this one moves pretty quick. It has tight turns at a pretty good speed, along with not being attached to the track. Reptilian was a pretty big surprise. Number 13 is Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion. Credit where credit is due. I had a ton of fun on I-305 this year. I got a ride in the front, then walked over to the back for round 2. As an old guy, I can't really marathon I-305, but I like to get one re-ride when I can. I think last time, I was more disappointed that it wasn't the elite ride that people made it out to be. And this time, I knew what it was, and I just enjoyed it for what it was. I still don't get why people rank it so high, especially since the ride dies after the trim break. But that middle section with the speed and all the switchbacks was so much fun, and it's something you aren't going to experience anywhere else in America. Number 12 is Dragon Slayer at Adventureland. This one's pretty simple. Last year, I accidentally rode the mild side, not knowing this ride actually has a mild side. It's not just enthusiasts being a bunch of nerds. The sign actually says mild side and wild side. It would help if I actually took the time to read these things. So this year, I go back and I ride the wild side, or the side that's closer to the lake, and it nearly ripped my face and my legs off. So yeah, if you ride Dragon Slayer, please choose wisely. Number 11. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Magic Kingdom. I've always been a big fan of the one at Disneyland. It's one of the most perfect family coasters out there. Then I rode the one at Magic Kingdom for the first time in 10 years, and it really exceeded my memory and my expectations. It's such a long ride with 3 lift hills, but it doesn't meander around. Those first 2 sections were full of sharp turns and dips, even mixing in some trick track sections. I thought I may be imagining this, but on my Disney World Coasters video, you all confirmed that this does indeed exist, so thanks for that. I no longer think I'm crazy. Well, at least when it comes to Big Thunder Mountain. Number 10. Invertigo at Kings Island. It had been a good 4 years since I rode this, and it didn't make much of an impression on me. I just remember it being pretty smooth and much better than a regular boomerang. I rode in the front for the first time and it was still pretty smooth, but the biggest thing that I noticed was the intensity. This might actually be the most intense ride in the park. It's amazing to think about, but you could make the argument. I think people write it off for being a boomerang, but it deserves more credit than that. Number 9. Racer at Kings Island. It seems like you can ride this 1 year and have a bad experience. Then the park does some work on it and suddenly it's running like new. In 2022, for its 50th anniversary, it was running amazing. I missed out on it in 2020 because it was being worked on, but I got to reap the benefits of that track work this year and I got 3 awesome rides. Sophie loved it. We rode both sides. She is very sensitive to roughness, and this did not bother her at all. I also got some airtime. That's not something I really remember from 2018 either. So all around, it was a great experience. Number 8. Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This is kind of a polarizing invert. Some people put it in the bottom half. Some say it's the best in America. My last ride was in 2018 and I was pretty impressed. The mid-course was on its max level back then, which didn't help the second half. But overall, I was on Team Alpengeist. In 2022, I got another ride in the back and it was incredible. I thought there was kind of a rattle last time, but I didn't get that at all this time. It was very smooth, but the thing that got me the most was the intensity. In the first half, before the mid-course, it felt like it was going way too fast through its inversions. It was so intense that I was actually drooling. That's something I didn't think I was going to admit to, but I just did, so there. It's definitely a top-tier invert. Number 7. Texas Stingray at SeaWorld San Antonio. I rode this when it was brand new in 2020. It was a cloudy day and it seemed to be running kinda slow. I also only got to ride it in the morning, which didn't help. Plus, I was kind of expecting a ride like Mystic Timbers. It turned out to be more like Apocalypse. In 2022, I came back on a hot day, rode it in the afternoon and the evening, and it was so much better. I was forced into row 3 and got stapled on my last ride, which sucked. But my first ride of the day was perfect. Back row, with some room, and it was out of control and had several airtime pops. It was a bit rougher than 2020, but nothing to complain about. But the ride experience made me move it from a mid-tier GCI to close to the top tier. Number 6. Griffon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. I admit, I forgot how good this ride was. I was thinking SheiKra was better. Valravn outranks it by a lot. But no, Griffon is the best dive coaster in America and it's not close. It has everything you want in a dive coaster, starting with the old school restraints, the ones that give you all the airtime on the first drop. It's also insanely smooth. That hasn't always been my experience on B&M dives. 2 drops, 2 inversions, the splashdown, and it ends with that jarring transition to the brakes, which is pretty awesome. The ride isn't that complex, but it's pure fun. The perfect first B&M for Sophie. Number 5. Invader at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This GCI gets a lot of hate, and after my first ride in 2019, I could see why. It's basically a family-style wooden coaster. It didn't really pull any force, but that day was cold and cloudy, so it wasn't running at its max potential. This time, it seemed like it was firing on all cylinders. I noticed how powerful it was this time compared to last time. Way more forces all around. It also ran a lot rougher than the first time, which could be due to age, or maybe having more speed. Or again, maybe the roughness made it seem more intense. Still, I came off with a much higher opinion of it, and Sophie was very impressed. Number 4. Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. My experience with this RMC was pretty much getting a 6-ride marathon on a rainy morning in 2018. I loved it. It was easily a top 20 coaster. But there was something about this year's rides that were just off the wall great. Not only is the layout packed with airtime, it runs through the course with so much power. It's just an absolute riot all the way through. Sophie was a huge fan also. We got a bunch more rides on a hot sunny day, something like 4 or 5. And when you look at Twisted Timbers, it doesn't really stand out as a special RMC, but it really is. I think at this point, it's got to be considered a possible top 10 coaster. Number 3. Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. I think I love this more every time I ride it. It does kind of matter what ride ops you get. It seems like half the time they're cool. The other half, they want to staple you so hard your butt actually fuses to the seat. Goliath was an enormous winner for me this year, and that was after having an incredible ride last year. It's not the tallest hyper, its drop doesn't even hit 200 feet, but the layout is so good. Big airtime hills, a mid-course helix, and then a wild run of small airtime hills at the end. Back to back to back to back. Best ride in the park, and it jumps into my overall top 25. Number 2. Steel Eel at SeaWorld San Antonio. I've always liked this ride. It was in my top 50 for years, but over time it got pushed out. The first half was always impressive, but then it died in the second half. This year, I was absolutely flying in the first half. That's no surprise. But it was that second half that suddenly got awesome. It had so much more speed coming off the mid-course. I was actually flying out of my seat on that last run of airtime hills. We were only gonna ride this once, but I had to come back and ride it one more time. It was so addictive, I couldn't just settle for one. This definitely found its way back into my top 50. Number 1. Monster at Adventureland. I rode this for the first time in 2021 and I was very impressed. It wasn't quite top 50 worthy, but it was the star of the park and made the trip worth it. I came back this summer and got 2 more rides and my opinion changed in a weird way. It went from, this is a really good ride, to, this is one of the most perfect rides I've ever ridden. From the lap bar restraint, the beyond vertical drop, all those unique elements taken one after another. It feels like a long ride. It pulls all kinds of forces, from ejector on the first drop, to hang time on the inversions, to lateral whip on the dive loop. The ride is beautiful, and unlike hang time, you don't come off disappointed. As much as I loved it the first time around, I think I underrated it and it deserves so much more respect. This was well outside my top 50 last year, but no more. It's getting the bump it deserves. So that's all for the coasters that shot up my list this year. If you have any thoughts on these rides, let me know. If you had a similar experience or completely different, sound off in the comments below. Come back later this week for the 15 coasters that shot down my list this year. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like. And if you're new here and love coaster content like this, please give me a sub. Also, check out my links below for my Discord server, and my second channel where I post copyright-free off-ride footage, and my baseball channel if you also happen to love baseball. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.